Hello, everyone. I just started the meeting, so I'll wait for the attendees to start coming in and then we'll get going.
Oh, I've been promoted. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, I'm gonna shut off then. I'll be here.
All right, folks, I think we're probably gonna get started around 9:02 or so. Just give everyone a minute to trickle in. All right, so it's 9:02 here, so I think we might get started on this presentation real quick, and hopefully some more folks will trickle on in. Uh,
Can everybody hear me okay? I think it's working. Cool. Thank you. I was having issues with my earbuds, so I had to switch over real quick. So yeah, we will get started. So today we're going to be talking about the housing allocation, um, briefly go over, what can and can't change, and then look at the custom methodology. Um, that Bongo, Kevin, and I have been working on. And then after that, we're going to dive into the CPPs and what's been updated since the last steering committee. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up our PowerPoint. And then Bongo is going to dive into HAPT, and then Kevin Freibot is here as well, who's going to talk about the custom methodology. Are you seeing the correct thing?
all right, fantastic. Thank you, Tate. So yeah, we're going to talk just a little bit about about HAPT, explain some things that we haven't before, and then get a little bit into the custom methodology we developed in line with the steering committee's recommendations. Could you get the next slide, please? So something I wanted to touch on before, which I think I've done a poor job of explaining, is that all of the methodologies that come kind of stock with HAPT actually do factor in a lot of pieces of local data.
We can't hear you.
I can't hear either Bongo or Tate. I don't know if that's just me, but
We've lost both the PowerPoint and the audio.
All right, am I coming through okay? Can folks hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you,
Yeah.
Bongo.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Apologies there, I'm having to go through my laptop microphone, but yes, I do believe we have to take a roll. Let's see. The chair is Al French, who's not here. Councilman Cathcart, I might defer it to you as vice chair if we want to do a quick roll call for this.
It appears he may have stepped away.
I just texted
Oh, are
everybody.
folks looking for me?
Yes. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Things are really garbly. I can barely make out what's being said. So, and I don't have a list of people to do a roll call. So if somebody else has that list, they could do it. That'd be great.
Do we happen to have the list of SEO members in front of us? Ella, unfortunately, is not with us at the moment. I can try and dig into it. Let's see. Give me just a moment. All right, I will go ahead and start taking roll. Just want to make sure. Can someone give me a thumbs up if they can hear me? Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to have these screens side by side here. Let's see. Commissioner French, I believe is absent. Commissioner Kearns.
here.
Okay. Commissioner Waldriff. Councilwoman Klitsky.
Present.
Councilman Cathcart.
Present.
Councilman Dillon. And I believe we have Councilman Hattenberg. Let's see here. And then Deputy Mayor Higgins. Councilman Bowman. Okay. And then we have Mayor Cooper.
Here.
Okay. Let's see here. Just gonna make sure I'm not missing anyone who's here. Just going through the list real quick. Okay, Mayor Grover. Mayor Kaminskas. I sincerely apologize for the mispronunciation. All right. Let's see. Councilmember Harnoy. Harnoy. Again, I sincerely apologize. Okay.
Mayor Kaminskas did put in something in the chat that counter is present. She's on her phone with Zoom and not managing that too well, but to say she's here.
Fantastic. Thank you for the note, Mayor Cooper. And then Mayor Freeman. All right. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started there. Thank you for the reminders to take roll. Apologies as we figure this out. Could you please pull up the presentation again, and then we can get cracking here. It's sharing. If you just go full screen, we can. I believe it is recording. Yes.
Okay. Can we send it out to all those absent folks? Seems like a lot.
There are a lot of absent folks. Yes.
send. Oh. Okay, can you hit the next slide, please? So I'm just going to run through this pretty briefly, but we wanted to touch on a little bit of some analyses that APT includes in the base methodologies. There are several we want to touch on, but the first being, I guess the overall thing I want to illustrate is that HAPT includes a lot of pieces of local analysis, things that are specific to Spokane, numbers that are specific to Spokane, not just statewide goals or anything like that. For example, there are pieces of HAPT that specifically look at eliminating rental cost burden in Spokane based on what we call CHAS data, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy, that comes from HUD. Housing needed to eliminate homelessness, that comes from two different sources, HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System, and the Snapshot of Homelessness, which I believe is from the Department of Social and Health Services. And then also housing needed to accommodate future growth based on our population projections that came before this body. Could you hit the next slide, please? Excuse me. And there's another thing I wanted to illustrate. I'm just going to take a little sip of water here. There are many pieces of HAPT that we are just unable to change that are mandated by the state. And those are kind of two main things here. So you can see what we can't change is there in red. Can you back up, please? That's okay. What we can't change is there in red. So for example, the total housing units needed for a jurisdiction, that's going to stay the same no matter what. If we use A, B, C, A prime, doesn't matter. That's going to stay exactly the same. And then the total housing needs for each income band, that's going to stay the same as well. So yeah, and actually, could you do the next one? So what can we change then? Basically, what we can do is we can kind of shift this around. Again, it still has to meet the total housing allocation, the total units needed, excuse me, per jurisdiction, and the total units needed by income band. But we can shift those around, if that makes sense. So all the things in blue, we can shift those among jurisdictions, but everything in red still needs to be met. Yeah, does that make sense? I can open it for questions for a second if there's any confusion on that.
Bongo, this is Joel White. Is the county UGAs, does that include the other incorporated cities inside of the UGA?
No, that's just the North Metro, the yeah, unincorporated UGAs.
Okay, how do the cities then count into this? The other
They have their own. They have their own.
This is not included in the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is just a really kind of abbreviated version of HAP, just to kind of throw something on the board for people to look at. These aren't the exact numbers. This isn't every jurisdiction, just kind of a quick little way to illustrate it. Can you hit the next slide, please? Yeah, and so then largely Kevin Freibot, who I think has done a great job on this, has been working on a custom methodology in line with what the SCEO asked us to do last time. And I'm gonna kick it over to you, Kevin, if you want to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you guys can hear me all right. So the last time SCEO met and discussed these methods, the committee asked staff to explore the specific methodology that King County used. And what King County did is they tried to inform their allocation, to adjust their allocation basically based on a ratio, a theoretical ratio. And that ratio is low income jobs. So the way the data source, which is census loads data, the way that's split is by 40,000 a year and under. There's two brackets there, but we summed them. So did King County. So just imagine when we say low wage, we mean 40,000 a year or less. So this ratio was 40,000 a year or less jobs divided by the 40,000 a year or less employees that live in a specific area. And King County did this because there are so many cities in King County. They did it where they grouped cities into what they called opportunity zones. And so they took, there's this opportunity zone has 5 cities in it. They combine those 5 cities. And then this one has 12 in it and they combine those 12 cities. Spokane County isn't really shaped that way. Our cities are much larger. And so what we have done is we've recreated their ratio based on jurisdictions. But it's still the same ratio. So it's low income jobs or low wage jobs, less than 40,000 a year, over low wage residents in each city. So for the jobs, it doesn't matter the jobs number, it's those jobs are worked in that jurisdiction. It doesn't matter where those people live. It's any job in that jurisdiction that pays less than 40,000 a year. That's the top of the ratio. The bottom of the ratio is any job or any resident that makes less than 40,000 a year at a job, but that job can be anywhere. And so that's the idea here. And what King County was trying to do was to come up with a rule of thumb idea of where there were lots of low wage jobs, but there weren't enough low wage homes or homes affordable to low wage residents. And so, there's ancillary benefits to that. You have people living where they work, that kind of thing. It is theoretical. It isn't perfect. It's based on census data, but it is synthesized into larger chunks because the census data comes in blocks. And King County used this. I see you, Councilmember Cathcart. I'll get you to 1 second. King County used this metric, but again, they grouped their cities into larger areas. We have this a sample of this by jurisdiction. Your question, Councilmember?
Well, I guess I'm wondering, are we looking at this at a more kind of hyper local level below that of the jurisdiction level? Because otherwise it feels like we're just pushing, the city's going to get a higher share just by default because we have a higher share of jobs. So how is that actually being considered?
Yeah, it is possible to synthesize this data in any number of geographies. In fact, we looked at tracts as well. Unfortunately, tract boundaries don't match with city boundaries. But census provides this data at the block level. Individual jurisdictions who want to see like this number within their own jurisdiction could do the analysis and find it. We just haven't, the time required for this is extreme. It's a lot of work to get this synthesized, and not every jurisdiction do we have down to the, whatever you want it to be, block, group, blocks, tracks. It's all census geographies. You can do that. In this case, though, each individual city, because it's a ratio of the residents and the jobs in that city, it's a ratio, it's not a count. So the fact that City of Spokane is much bigger than the other jurisdictions doesn't mean our number is affected by our size. But it does mean that this analysis doesn't show detail within each jurisdiction.
And then can I follow up with one more?
Mm-hmm.
How are we, or are we considering future, future growth, future expansion, things like that? Obviously there are some areas where we are more focused on trying to bring more jobs than other areas. And so just how does all of that play into this calculation?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a snapshot in time. This is 2022 data, I think. Bongo, remind me, was that the year or was it 2021? So it is a little.
I want to say 2021.
I think so too. So it's a snapshot. It does not factor in trend. It does not factor in long term. And some of the concerns that you're raising, council member, are concerns that we share as well. And I think it's in the next slide is kind of our analysis of how this worked out. But if I don't get to what you're concerned about, council member, I'll come back to you. This is what the result is. And really, I made a map so that it's pretty and you can see colors and get some comparisons, but it's really just a number. And you can see here the results. So for instance, the city of Spokane, the entire city of Spokane, we have a fairly close match between the number of low wage jobs that are worked in the city and the number of workers living in the city who work low wage jobs. So that's what our ratio is about 1.15. Conversely, you see Liberty Lake and Airway Heights, their numbers much higher, which under this method would say they have a lot of lower wage jobs, but not a lot of lower wage housing. Under the King County method, what that would mean is that we would want to apply some kind of factor to raise the allocation to those two cities in the lower affordability bands. Now, as Bongo showed earlier in that slide, it isn't as simple as moving one number. You have to still have the rows in the table and the columns total. So if Airway Heights had to take more of the affordable housing, we'd have to take it from another jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction, to keep its total the same, would have to probably add homes in the higher affordability range. So it's complex. It's a shell game. That said, after PTAC looked at this and the housing subcommittee, we've been around this about 3 times. It has some definite disadvantages for Spokane County. One is one that Councilmember Cathcart has already identified, that there's really a vast change in city size in the different cities in Spokane. So it makes it really hard to say this is a comparison between cities when they're just so very vastly different. Second of all is also something Councilmember Cathcart raised, which is that these are just snapshots of all of the jurisdiction at once. If I was to take this data, for instance, and split City of Spokane out, and then look at regions within City of Spokane, either tracts or block groups, you'd see that it's not uniform across the city. The ratio is not at all uniform. That isn't to say that individual jurisdictions can't use this analysis. I mean, I've got the data. I'm happy to hand it to anyone. Could use this to say, find out what parts of the city, if they want to support this concept, that what parts of the city they could focus housing on and what parts they may not need to focus low-income housing on. But for the overall allocation, which is the HAPT tool, we have to have one number. There's a lot of open questions left by this method. One is the gray area you see is the unincorporated UGA. That's not a census boundary. So we would have to do a lot more work to find this number for the unincorporated UGA, a lot of work. We're talking about a record that has millions of lines of records. It's not a simple process. So the gray areas are a question. Also, to what extent might this ratio influence the allocation? The idea is that in those higher numbers, you would then boost the affordability, the lower affordability houses. How much? How much of a weight do we want to apply this to? There's really no guidance and there's no good science that tells us what that is. Ultimately, the housing subcommittee could not come to any kind of a support for this that was significant. We talked about it a lot, and we don't recommend necessarily that we use this method, but we did certainly explore it. We did learn a lot from it, and I think that there is data available that individual jurisdictions, if they're interested, could use to really understand this ratio within their jurisdictions. I think I covered all the points there, Bongo. Councilmember Cathcart, did I catch all your questions?
Yeah, I think so. And I just think there's probably just a lot more analysis and thinking through of all of this. So
yeah, it's one thing we've learned going through this is it's complex and it's hard to get your brain around it. Bongo, Tate, and I have been talking about this probably almost every day for the last 3 weeks, and we still confuse ourselves with it. We're inventing something new here, and that makes it tough. Even though King County's working on it, even they aren't finished with it. They're still working on their allocation. So,
yeah. Well, thank you, Kevin. And I guess, Tate, if you could kick it over to the next slide, I would just love to open it up for questions, particularly any reactions that steering committee members have to this method C. We would certainly be very grateful to hear. So I will just give everyone a chance if you would like to chime in.
Well,
All right.
I think in theory, this makes a lot of sense because people should be able to live near their jobs, especially if they're low income. But if it takes too much resources to refine it to a useful level, then maybe not. But it would be a great tool for the cities to use as they plan their individual comp plan updates in UGA.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken, Councilmember Lipinski, and that's something that Tate and I have discussed with Kevin, and I think with the technical advisory committee as well, is that even if we don't use the specific methodology that Kevin developed, even if we just use method A prime, which I think it's fair to say is the kind of consensus at this point among planners. I'll speak for myself, at least that would be my recommendation. But even if we go that way and we don't use this custom methodology, there's so much data in there that Kevin has the ability to just send it out to people and they can say, they can break it down more specifically into neighborhoods and all these things, and they can say, oh well, this is a problem here, we need to do this here, whatever it is. in terms of doing it as a methodology itself, I think it would be, hundreds of hours more to get 2 or 3% better data. But I think what we've done so far, sets us up really, really well to implement this in a really fantastic way that can get into the nitty gritty because of all the work that Kevin's done. But yes, your point is certainly well taken, council member. All right, I'm just gonna give everyone else just one moment here if anyone else wanted to chime in on this. If not, I can give my closing spiel and then we can kick it over to Tate to talk a little bit about the countywide planning policies. But does anyone else have anything they wanted to add on this?
I guess I'll just ask. So I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, and please correct me if I'm not, that it did seem the majority of the group was looking for some sort of alternative method here, not A, not B. They were looking for some sort of alternative, and I, we didn't come to an agreement on what that alternative method would be, but if this one that Kevin just presented sort of isn't, if we don't think it's feasible, is there another method out there that any other communities are kind of trying to mold or come up with right now that we will be looking at? So because again, it didn't seem like anybody was too interested in A or B, so we were interested in some sort of option C, whatever that could be. So yeah, what other possibilities or options are out there right now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. We have looked at what other communities have done for their method Cs. A lot of them were very local specific. I want to say, I can't remember if it was Skagit or Lewis County, but one of them, for example, cited more housing near I-5, so a very specific thing locally. Snohomish, well, I won't get super into the weeds on it. I think the kind of long and short of it is that in terms of implementing it in Spokane County, I think that King County's methodology, what Kevin has just presented, probably would be the most likely contender. Method C could theoretically be, anything that we can defend as long as we meet what I described earlier. We have to meet the total needs for that income band, total needs for the county, total needs for each jurisdiction. What's the phrasing I'm looking for here? So, that could be anything that we would like. I think the thing we've struggled with is that it takes, a month, 2 months to develop any custom methodology. And if there's not a really specific idea of what we really want to look at, then, we might end up just kind of burning 4, 5, 6 months trying to look for it and end up getting to a very similar point. So I apologize if that's too candid of a phrase on my part, but I hopefully that answered your question, Commissioner Kearns. I just wanted to check real quick if there was anything else I wanted to touch on there.
Yeah, I mean, are we in a better place, do you think, legally, or being able to defend it if it's modeled off of something someone else is doing rather than coming up with something that is completely specific to Spokane? Are we better if we can point and say, well, no, we did this based off of this other community? Does that give us a stronger defense rather than coming up with something that's totally new and specific to us?
So I'm of course not an attorney, but having looked at the requirements for this, what I can say is that there is a lot of latitude given to jurisdictions to customize this. And Commerce is very specific about what you can and cannot do, which is what I laid out. So as long as we meet all of those things, I think we're on safe ground. It's from my perspective, I'll just speak for myself as a planner. My concern is less so if we can defend this or not, because I think we can get to something that's defensible. It's more so, can we get to something that is significantly better than, I think, method A prime, for example? And to be quite candid, I don't know if we can. I think we might be able to get to something that's 5-10% better, but it might require 4 months of staff time to do that. Councilman Cathcart.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I'm misremembering then. I had thought there was pretty wide latitude for us to do our own, and that, defending it wasn't too much of a concern, because I thought there was some conversation around, could there even just be direct negotiation between the jurisdictions on you take some of this, I'll take some of that, and it works out in the wash. And so if that's not allowed, or we don't think that's defensible, then I would agree with you. We're never going to get to any sort of a C, unless there is some great methodology that just, we can plug it in and go. So maybe I just need to have a better understanding of what the actual requirement is with regards to us being able to defend the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna have Tate kick it over just a couple slides to what can't change, if that's possible, and we can get back into that. But oh gosh, as soon as I unmute my mic, it clicks an invisible all my thoughts are gone button. But I think the best way I can phrase it is that we can anything in the blue there we can shift around. So theoretically, if we wanted to, we could move things from Airway Heights to the city of Spokane or whatever it may be. I think methodologically, and as a planning practice, I don't know that that's personally what I would recommend. Just speaking for myself, I don't claim to speak for every planner here, but we could do that. The thing that we would arrive at is, of course, all the things in red that no matter what happens, let's say, Cheney and Airway Heights swap some of the income bands, they still have to meet their housing units total. And the countywide needs don't change. Those absolutely just have to be met. So we could move it around and do kind of some of that horse trading. I think the thing we would arrive at is that, in terms of the top numbers of we need this many to 0 to 30 units, this many to 30 to 50, it will just by mandate be identical. That's impossible to change. We could kind of switch what it is in the middle. I would recommend against doing that personally, because it would take, again, 4-6 months, somewhere around there, and the top numbers are going to have to be identical at the end of the day. But Councilman Cathcart, did I touch on what you were saying there?
Yes, but I don't know if I agree, in the sense of, I think there might be some things in A and some things in B that some folks might have some disagreements on, which is why a majority previously said they wanted a version C. And so I mean, it's entirely possible we have consensus around A or B, but my guess is, for the reasons kind of stated last time, that won't necessarily be the case. And so if there's not consensus there, or I guess we can just take a vote and see what happens. But I think we're going to have to come up with some method for figuring out how to make all of us, or most of us, more comfortable with whatever the numbers are. So whatever that process looks like, I tend to think sitting around a table, negotiating, talking about different things makes a ton of sense to me. But, regardless, I'm open to whatever.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, Tate.
Okay. I would just add, and Kevin, I saw you had your hand up, so maybe you can expand. I think the reason behind the methodologies, one, the updated method A, which we're leaning towards, accounts for some of the concerns. It delineates between urban and rural growth, so we would have that differentiation. The reason I think in PTAC we were leaning towards adopting one of the commerce methodologies is timeline. This is the beginning of the planning process, and so studying a more custom methodology would take more time, and so it would be a bit more sufficient to adopt something now and apply that. However, if this body does want to pursue a custom methodology or keep studying these things, I think having more pointed guidance on what needs to be studied beyond, what Kevin presented here with the wage ratio would be extremely helpful. But Kevin can correct me if I'm wrong, or other planners can correct me, but I think there was a tendency to lean towards adopting one of commerce is due to time. Cathcart.
Can I
Oh,
add?
no,
Go
please,
ahead. Sorry.
please.
I want to make just a couple notes just to kind of help your thinking here. You know, we at the PTAC level, we're staff. We were trying to find methods of adjusting this that were not less about, I think we should have 400 less units. Then it is a mathematical or a statistical way of looking at these numbers and adjusting them. The King County method is that. It's a statistical exercise in order to adjust the numbers. It is not for staff to say, I think that's 500 units too many. We can't come at it from that point. And so when we say that we have latitude to come up with, we, the county and the region, have latitude to come up with a custom method, we do. And that kind of trading between jurisdictions can happen, but there's no mathematical or logical process that we as staff can write out that would say what that should be. We've explored many different options. We've explored the King County method and found it to be lacking. We've explored other things that other counties have done. So it may be, council member, that it's time for the trading back and forth, but that's not something that I think staff is equipped or authorized to suggest. And just keep in mind with that kind of adjustment, if we go totally custom, where jurisdictions are trading back and forth, it isn't just changing that number in that affordability column. Everything has to, it's a circle. If you change, say you took on this table that we see right now, you took 100 units out of the 0 to 30 in Spokane and gave them to Spokane Valley. Now Spokane Valley has 100 units too many. So they have to reduce 100 units in another income bracket or affordability bracket. And also the city of Spokane now has 100 too few housing units. So we have to add 100 somewhere else. So it's a square. Every time you make an adjustment, it's complex. But there is no good method that we've found or that we're aware of any other jurisdiction has found for coming up with some third option that is not based entirely on the commerce allocation and then adjusting it. So hopefully that helps.
As a data nerd, that all sounds really fun. So, but putting that aside, is there do we have to have this done by a date certain? Is this something that theoretically could kind of float till towards the end of the process, or do we need this firmed up in the immediate term?
Well, there is not a statutory adoption like requirement. We must have it by September of 2025 or 2024. There isn't one of those. But what it is doing is it's holding up all of the other planning that we have to do.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah. The LCA, we have preliminary numbers for that. We can talk about people, but we haven't figured out houses yet. And until we know our capacity for houses and our ability to accommodate this development, that's the first question. Are we big enough? Do we have enough room? That tells us what level of planning and code changes and policy changes we need to start preparing for 2026. So there is no statutory deadline, but we are holding up other work that's necessary by not having this figured out. But then again, nobody's got this figured out yet.
That's really good to know. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Let's see, Mr. Wendell, I'll probably kick it over to you, and we're going to switch over to CPPs probably after this. But
okay, I'll go quick. Kevin kind of just answered kind of about the availability of real estate to actually develop. Period. I'm looking at this and planner for the school district. This would be like drinking from a fire hose with the variables you guys are dealing with on this planning by itself. Wouldn't most of that growth have to be pointed at the unincorporated areas, just because inside Spokane County, there seems to be, enough growth that it's overbuilt. You kind of going to have to push it out to the unincorporated areas. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, Kevin, do you mind if I take that one?
Sure, go for it.
I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Wendell. And actually, I think, what's the phrasing I'm looking for? I guess I'll just briefly reiterate. In terms of how much housing gets assigned to a specific jurisdiction, that's going to be set by our population allocations. So a preliminary version of that was adopted by this body and by the Board of County Commissioners, I believe. We're planning to not planning. We're going to come back for kind of a second cut at that with a more refined thing. But currently, what you see here, I believe, is the actual number, the 30.52% of growth going to county UGAs. I might have, be 1 or 2% off, but that is all to say a significant portion of the growth we do expect to go to county UGAs, and we account for that in our population allocations. Mr. White, if you want to make this, yeah, please go ahead, and then I'll kick it over to Tate.
No, I'll be quick here. Thank you. Going back to this, so looking at the document we're going to jump into, going back to affordable housing, if we're looking at some of these population allocations, it does basically talk about infrastructure. So if you look at the areas, we're going to put a lot of low-income people out in the unincorporated areas. You're not going to have access to a lot of the services that are necessary for those individuals. So it goes back to, we're counter basically to what we're saying we want, but then we're going to put people in, allocate land where it's not really viable for them to live, or make it more difficult. So I'm not making a political statement. I'm just saying that's a real challenge for us as looking at this as a plan.
Yeah, well, and I hear you, Mr. White, and I think one of the things that I personally find so valuable about the method A prime, which I think is my personal suggestion for what this body should use HAP methodology. One of the great things about that is that it does not assign any low-income housing 0 to 30% or 30 to 50% to rural areas. We don't treat urban growth areas any differently, unincorporated versus the city or anything like that, but it does, I think it's fantastic because it does exactly what you're describing. It doesn't put those low-income homes, allocate them to rural areas, which I think is fantastic. But with that, and being respectful of time, I do want to kick it over to Tate so we can talk a little bit about the CPPs there.
Cool, thank you. Let me go up here. So yeah, I'm maybe talk about the CPP's update. Just to give a recap, these were deferred back in 2022 by the steering committee due to knowing about these upcoming housing requirements, the planning for affordable housing, creating documentation programs, etc. The last draft you saw was back in July. Can you hear me okay? Oh, okay. So the first draft was produced in May, and this was iteratively edited from June to now. In July, again, SEO saw draft what we called version 2.1 on the 17th. And since that meeting, we have recirculated it, taken the feedback from that steering committee meeting and edited so far. And that takes us to now, which was version 2.2, which is the version you have all seen. And so the main changes made here were the changes to the categories. So the environmental sustainability category, it was removed, but we like to think of it more as reserved for the climate resiliency CPPs that are going to be created after steering committee and discussion in PTAC. We did feel like having it comprehensively talked about in this climate resiliency CPP category made more sense. We have gotten feedback since that from the public that really liked those policies. So I would just, reiterate that we did get feedback that pushed back on that idea, but we are reserving them. So I think that backs up the decision is that we're not throwing these away. We're just reserving them. For the monitor housing development category, we pared back the items and the monitoring item or remove them. The reason being is that an upcoming Washington administrative code is going to account for monitoring items for that program. And that was confirmed by Melissa Alafatuli from Commerce. And the emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing category, the one policy in there that we had previously got removed and left the category empty. We didn't want to leave it empty. We felt it was very important to plan for those things. And so policies 6.1 and 6.2 were added. And lastly, there was general edits. So more clarification on terms used or making sure there is a difference between jurisdictions planning for and county planning for things. The cities don't have to do a regional analysis. And so there was additional wording change there. And notably, the term special needs was replaced with vulnerable populations. And the reason for that being is that vulnerable populations is actually a state-defined term, whereas special needs wasn't. Vulnerable populations include groups at high risk for poor health outcomes. So that includes minority groups, low-income groups, and those disproportionately impacted by environmental harms. Lastly, there are new terms used in here like vulnerable populations that are probably necessary to be added to the CPP glossary. These are all defined by the state, so it wouldn't be too hard to clarify what we're defining here in the CPPs, but it is of note that there will be new glossary terms to be added. So for the schedule, today's the workshop. We're going to take the feedback we receive here today and incorporate it into what we want to be the final draft. The reason we're completing it tomorrow or the 23rd at the very latest is to make sure we have time for our director to review it in time for when it would need to be circulated on the 28th. And that would give us time to meet the September 18th steering committee public hearing where we could give PTAC recommendation. We'd send this for Commerce's 60-day review, and this would set us up for the board to consider the CPPs in October. And that's all I had. This is a bit of an abbreviated presentation, but the main discussion is around the policies themselves. And so I wanted to open it up for any feedback on the policies or anything at all. Going once, going twice. Oh yeah.
So just kind of reiterate what Tate said. We are going to be finishing this draft tomorrow. So if there is feedback on this, now would certainly be the time to do it. Otherwise, we will plan to finalize these CPPs as is with the glossary terms added as per Tate's description. Mr. White, I see your hand up, and then I'll give it the public a chance to weigh in just a moment. But Mr. White, please.
Okay, I was just questioning a little more background, and I'm trying to find it in here, but basically where homeowners can put a covenant in their house. Just seeing, I did a little bit of research on that. Seems like there's some legal potentials. Is that been already resolved in the state of Washington?
Well, let's see. I think covenant is a very broad term. I know when we say that, we mean like an affordable housing covenant, something to the effect of, people will put something on their deed saying, we're going to sell this at a cost that is affordable, or there are different ways of measuring it. But I'm going to make up a number here. Let's say they agree to sell it for something that's affordable for people in the 0 to 30% AMI category. I don't know, maybe like $120,000, something like that. Completely made up number. But there are examples of like racist covenants of people saying, we won't rent this home to, people other than white families. That's of course not what we're talking about. But when you search the term housing covenant, something like that can come up, and of course that would not be legal, but we're not talking about anything like that at all. But I do believe there's very firm legal ground in Washington. I know King County has a great number of these, and we could certainly look to those as an example. But it's a fairly wide practice, so I think we're at very firm legal ground there.
Okay, so it's allowed. We're just saying that someone could do that with their property if they wanted to. It's not going to be a requirement.
No, not a requirement, not at all. Just another option.
It does refer to a homeowner, not so would that refer to like a developer or someone who owns an apartment complex? Because it says homeowner.
I think when we think about it, we think about it largely in terms of the ownership model. I haven't looked into, as great detail of how this might be done in a rental capacity. But it would be done by whoever owns the property. Yes.
Okay.
Right, fantastic. And let's see. I know we have a oh gosh, I'm pulling up the participants tab. We have a number of members of the public here who thank you all for joining us, certainly. But I do want to give anyone from the public an opportunity if you would like to weigh in on these CPPs or HAPT if you would like. If you just raise your hand, I can give you the chance to speak. So any members of the public, if you'd like to weigh in, please raise your hand, and I will let you do so. See, I'll give it about 10-15 seconds there. Oh, Mr. Kropp. All right, you're live.
So could you just go back to the timeline for the final on this?
For the certainly. So we're going to finish the final draft of this tomorrow. And Tate, I wonder if you could maybe pull back up the presentation that shows the timeline. But the short version of this is that we are going to finish the draft tomorrow. We're going to come back to the steering committee with the recommendation to approve this draft in a public hearing next month, I believe September 18th, something to that effect. Does that answer your question, Paul? Did you have a more specific one?
No, that's fair. I would just like to see the slide again.
Certainly. I think Tate pulled that up.
If that's not too.
No, that's all right. That's, that's what we're here for. The joys of technology. Perfect. Yeah, so there we go. And I'll just briefly note on the Commerce 60-day review thing. Of course, October 15th is less than 60 days after August 28th. We have it on there because Commerce often reviews those in a faster timeline. If we needed to, the board adoption could be a little bit later.
Right.
So that's not a concern at all. But
Thank you.
yes, of course. All right, Mr. Kropp, if you didn't have anything else to add there, I will give you the boot, and then we'll give anyone else a chance to talk. All right, seeing nothing, I'm gonna do that, and then let's see. Any other members of the public who would like to chime in on that? If not, I will kick it back over to the SEO and probably get us close to wrapped up here. Let's see, any other members of the public? All right, fantastic. So yes, I just want to kick it back over to steering committee members. If there is any final feedback you have on these, as I said, we are going to be finishing this draft tomorrow, and we are going to be coming back to this body with a recommendation for September. So if there are, if there are any outstanding pieces of feedback you would like to give, now would be the time to do that. Right, and seeing nothing there, I'll just give everyone one more chance. Just give it maybe 5-10 seconds. All right, so we are going to be adding those definitions as described by Tate, but otherwise the document you will see will be the one, the draft you have seen. Yes. All right, so I think that's everything we had today. And I'm going to kick it back over to Tate.
I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, so I think Tate's just reiterating again the wonders of technology, but Tate's just reiterating that we will make sure to send over this recording to all the steering committee members, including those who were unable to attend today. I know you all have very busy schedules, so we sincerely appreciate you carving out the time for this this special meeting. So just kind of reiterate what we've done here. We're going to be coming back to the steering committee in September for a public hearing on the CPPs. They're going to be the same ones you have just reviewed, with the addition of a couple definitions as described by state law. There won't be any big surprises there. Excuse me. And then we are hoping to have HAPT wrapped up in September as well. My recommendation to this body would be to go with method A prime. And of course, in the intervening time period, we would absolutely welcome your feedback. If there are concerns about that, we've heard some today. If there are very specific ideas on what we might include in a method C, I think that we can certainly look into that. The thing I would just mention is, as Kevin stated, so much of our planning relies on this as kind of as a first step. So the sooner we can get an allocation decided, the better for everyone. But all right, with that, I think I will bid everyone adieu. But again, thank you all very much for taking the time, and we will see you in September.